Good afternoon. My name is Heather Iliff, and I'm President and CEO of Maryland Nonprofits. Welcome to the webinar on COVID-19, What Nonprofits Need to Know. You can type your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we will get to them as we are available, and we're so delighted that you could join us today. I'd like to introduce my co-panelists. We have Henry Bogdan, who's our Director of Public Policy, Carmen Marshall, our Director of Consulting, and Patty Morton, our General Counsel, are going to be sharing the latest information that they've been able to gather, and again, will be available to answer your questions. I wanted to provide a quick overview of Maryland Nonprofits, who we are and what we do. Our mission is to strengthen organizations and networks for greater quality of life and equity. We also are the home of the Maryland Association of Resources for Families and Youth. That organization, known as MARFI, is a provider network for child welfare organizations. And we do direct consulting for nonprofit organizations in a wide range of areas. We're the largest and most comprehensive nonprofit-focused consulting organization in Maryland, and we do work on strategic planning, fundraising, mergers and collaboration, diversity, equity, and inclusion, boards and board governance, organizational development and restructuring, many issues that can help your organization in good times and challenging times. We're also the home of the Standards for Excellence program that provides a full suite of resources for nonprofits on everything from disaster and continuity planning, which is quite relevant now. Guide to remote and telework is one of our Standards for Excellence, education resource packets, and board member job descriptions, employee handbook. All of those materials are available free of charge to Maryland Nonprofits members, and you can also apply all of those standards in your organization and become accredited. I mentioned Henry Bogdan on our call, our Director of Public Policy. We do advocate both at the state and federal levels on behalf of nonprofits and communities that nonprofits serve, and we do that with an equity lens, and we really want to focus on what's most important for low-income Marylanders and many of Maryland's most vulnerable residents. Finally, I want to mention that we do have a program down in the bottom left corner. You see the Nonprofit Development Center. This is a free program for nonprofits that are less than $750,000 in revenue and less than 10 years old. And you can apply for that program on our website. It's a very simple application, and that can enable you to get access to all of those Standards for Excellence resources I mentioned, free to download, as well as access to some one-on-one technical assistance. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website that is free. You'll get news from the nonprofit sector and resources important to you. And we also have information on our website about becoming a member. Becoming a member of Maryland Nonprofits starts at $100 a year and goes up from there based on your budget. If you do want to become a member and are not able to afford the dues, please do reach out to us. We want to make our programs accessible to the entire nonprofit sector. So you're going to want to talk with Darius Johnson on our staff, or really any member of our team can assist you. I wanted to also mention that we're going to be covering many items very quickly today, and we'll be going into more depth in some of those over the coming weeks. And in one of those areas is tomorrow, open to everyone, guidance for employers in the midst of COVID-19. So Patty Morton is leading that call with a number of other presenters to go into detail on issues of insurance and unemployment and some of the federal programs that are available. So if you are an HR person, you're an executive director, you're a CFO, you really want to join that call tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and that is free and open to the public. And then on Friday, we have our members only weekly call at 2 p.m. and that's a real swap shop, ways to hear what's going on, support each other. And we do that members only call also on Tuesdays at 3:30 and Fridays at 2 o'clock for the time being, just during this COVID-19 crisis time, so we can all stay connected. On today's agenda, we're going to be providing a general overview of nonprofits and COVID-19. We're going to cover some of the basics of the governor's executive orders and how that relates to essential businesses. We are going to talk about the Small Business Emergency Relief Loan Program at the federal government and, the grant program and the loan program. We're also going to address how COVID-19 is an equity issue in Maryland and across the nation. It's bringing up many issues that we need to be attentive to, as well as within our own organizations. And then we're going to get into some nitty-gritty of how you can run remote board meetings during this time when your board can't meet in person. Some very basic overview on unemployment insurance, and we're still gathering information on that. And again, more information on that on tomorrow's webinar at 3 o'clock, as well as some of the ways that we're advocating on behalf of the nonprofit sector, both at the state and federal levels. So just to start out, I'd like to invite Henry Bogdan to share a little bit about Governor Hogan's executive orders and the status right now in Maryland around essential businesses.
All right, thank you, Heather. The slide there shows you a list of executive orders. That list actually was captured and put on the slide, and if you go to the web link at the bottom, you'll actually find more there. They've now put up a list of all the orders that have been issued, less formal orders that have been issued to implement executive orders, a list of interpretive guidance that has been put up by the Governor's Office of Legislative Counsel. So if you're wondering, you have questions about how one of those executive orders might apply to you, they've expanded, say, the essential businesses there at the top of the list, March 23. There's now a letter from the Governor's Council explaining how it helps you to find out what an essential business is for purposes of that executive order. Many of you recall when that was issued, it meant that all non-essential businesses had to close. If you're curious about what's essential, what's not essential, that letter is helpful guidance, and it also lists some other references. So, I mean, the governor's office and Governor Hogan has been very aggressive in trying to address the crisis. I think we're very lucky there compared to some other states. Other questions about executive orders, or we could move on. Again, the link at the bottom goes to a page on the governor's website. You'll see actually the complete list. There are more than that in effect right now. There's also a list of suspended executive orders. So they're putting up pretty thorough information.
Okay, thank you very much, Henry. And just a reminder, we will be sending out the slides so that the links will be live for you. And there's also a COVID-19 page on marylandnonprofits.org. Are the slides still visible? Okay.
I see the executive order slide.
Okay, my screen sharing is paused. Hold on.
So do you want me to go to the next slide, or?
Okay, so hold on just a second. So one of the things that while I figure out how to get on the screen and change the slide, I just wanted to mention that it's so important to follow reputable sources related to information on COVID-19. And sorry guys, I'm just gonna have to pause. May I switch over to you, Patty, if you would like to just share a little bit more information on, or maybe Henry, if you want to go share a little bit more information on what's happening in Congress right now while I get my screen working again.
Yes, thank you. Everyone I'm sure is, well, some of you probably are watching with bated breath, as I've been, about when the Senate and the House and the President are all going to get to the same place on the next phase of emergency relief. The package that is pending in the Senate, at least when I came into the room here to get on the webinar, they still don't have finally voted out as far as I know. And you may have seen that there are questions being raised in the House. Right now, the House is in pro forma session only, which means the members aren't there. They don't have rules for absentee voting or remote voting. The only way they can act on the bill, if the Senate bill were to come over to them in the next 10 minutes, would be by unanimous consent. So that may be tough to get. There's been an awful lot. I mean, I saw the former CEO of Hewlett Packard being interviewed this morning on TV saying that she didn't think that big corporations need any money. So, okay.
Well, we know nonprofits do, so yeah.
I mean, I think there will be something in the next day or two. They all feel the pressure to get the money out. Among other things, what in the Senate bill right now, you have a significant expansion of unemployment insurance coverage. For the first time, independent contractors and consultants, for example, will be allowed to draw unemployment benefits. The federal government is going to add something to the regular weekly benefit for a short period. They're going to be providing financial help to the states and others in paying unemployment insurance benefits. Policy issue you'll be hearing from us about. While it's likely that states, in Maryland, for example, has the emergency power to hold up on raising the tax rates of rate-paying employers, and the federal government is going to be providing some relief to the states to help with that. Most nonprofit employers for unemployment insurance purposes are reimbursing employers, which means you have an account in trust, and when the state, you have benefits paid out that are charged to you, that charge gets sent to the trust that's holding your account, and they pay the state out of that account. And when that account runs out of money and you still have benefits due, that's a cash burden on you. So there is 50% relief in the Senate bill for the unemployment charges to nonprofits. We've been working with our national association and a broad range of other national organizations to try and raise that to full coverage, full protection from the added cost of unemployment insurance benefits that you may need to pay. Right now, in the foreseeable future, until the next relief bill comes down the pike, I think that's all we're going to see at the federal level. So we're also beginning advocacy at the state level to try to get some relief there on that point.
Great, thank you, Henry. We'll be coming back to Henry for more on the federal and state action, and I got control of my slides again, so thank you very much. I wanted to provide a little bit more just framing around the overall issue of social distancing, which I didn't think we'd have to cover again, but is being raised as a question in the news as to the extent to which this really is necessary, or is are these protective measures going to hurt more than they will help? And we just want to follow the best guidance from the health professionals that we also understand is what Governor Hogan is following here in Maryland, and why it's so important for nonprofits to reinforce the message in communities. You may have seen in the Baltimore Sun, many people in the community, it's remarkable to me, but we're not even really aware of what was happening around COVID-19 and not aware of the guidelines to stay 6 feet apart from people. And so we want to make sure that nonprofits understand that the main reason for that is to, as they say, level the curve and make sure that the number of cases do not overwhelm our health system capacity. So this dotted line here is the health system capacity. The red curve is what would happen if we did not take these very serious social distancing measures, which are making life difficult for everyone, including nonprofits and families and all the people that we serve. But we want to make sure that we are reinforcing those messages being put out by the public health officials. And if any of you have any doctors or nurses in your family, which I have, you'll know that they are more strict than anyone. And that's really the guidance that we want to be sure to follow. Going to the nonprofit sector's role in the COVID-19 outbreak, we just want to point out that nonprofits account for 12.9% of Maryland's private workforce. And so we are a very critical lifeblood of the economy, in addition to being so critical in the programs and services that we provide to the community. And that's why our advocacy around funding issues is so critical. Most people think that most of nonprofit money comes from philanthropy, but in reality, we are businesses where 47% of our revenue comes from fee-for-service and 32% of our revenue comes from government. And so all of these measures that are relief to businesses, policymakers often leave out nonprofits in these policy solutions. And so we've been part of a national movement to make sure we're included in the stimulus bill. And we're also working at a state level to try to see if we can keep some of the government grants and contract funding flowing, even if you're not able to provide the services on site. It is important to note that 29.4% of Maryland's budget comes from federal sources, and much of the grants and contracts that nonprofits receive are a complex mixture of federal, state, and local funding. And so fanning out and telling our story at all of those levels and with the media is critical. So Henry, I want to go back to you around the Maryland Small Business Emergency Relief Grant Fund that is available right away to nonprofits.
All right, thank you. The governor announced this program this week. There are $50 million available in what's called the Maryland Small Business COVID-19 Emergency Relief Grant Fund, $50 million. Slide briefly summarizes this. Link at the bottom to the Department of Commerce. This is a Department of Commerce program. This program is open to nonprofits and for-profit businesses with 50 or fewer employees. Very basic requirements. You have to be in good standing with the state of Maryland. That means registrations, et cetera, have to be up to date. Your Maryland Form 1 annual filing, that should be done in good standing with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, for example. Annual revenues not to exceed $5 million. They'll ask for some documentation in terms of financial statements or some other documents to verify that. The use is broad. I mean, most of this relief that you're going to be hearing about is trying to keep people on payroll, keep businesses open, try to make certain that when the economy does start up, everybody's still in place. So this provides working capital to meet payroll, meet any other normal course of business bills that you have to pay, employee benefit costs as part of payroll. But it's $10,000. It's not a solution to a long-term problem. There's a statement if you look on the website about the program, I think there's a statement that says it's anticipated that participants and applicants will also be seeking financial relief of other kinds or longer-term financing to deal with their problems.
Okay, thank you, Henry. So a question came in the Q&A. So is the 50 FTE equivalents total 50 regardless of full-time, part-time status? Or I guess full-time equivalent means full-time, so it's not full-time employee, full-time equivalent. So if you have two 20-hour employees, that would be one full-time equivalent, right?
My understanding and the way that the SBA counts, and this is an assumption, and I'll verify this and we'll put the word out, but I assume this is counting all employees. You're going to hear us talk about a 500 employee limit. Actually, it's a cap. The SBA program we'll talk about is 1 to 499. They count full-time and part-time employees equally. And we already have on the website, I think, a reference to how employees get counted for that program. I've got to say right now, I'm just assuming that this is going to count the same way.
Okay, thank you. So we'll, and they've received thousands of questions, and we're in the queue, having asked many questions on everyone's behalf as well. So the question about the unemployment insurance, is that 50% of both the federal and state portion of UI?
Well, you basically just have a state liability. The state makes the payments. The feds can put more money on. The feds can authorize expansion of benefits to more people, but the state is going to charge you as a reimburser, charge your account for the benefits they pay out that are attributable to the time that employee worked for you, and the reimbursement will go to the state. The feds will be reimbursing, making money available to pay some of your costs, just as they're going to do that for state and local governments themselves.
Okay. And, what is the definition of a Maryland business under the relief fund? And are churches included?
I would think religious operations are allowed, but I would have to confirm that. I mean, we have not seen much detail in writing other than what people would see when they apply on the program.
I think the suggestion there is go ahead and apply.
Yeah, you should apply. Maryland businesses, they're probably going to want to see that you are incorporated, or your operation here, at least that your operation here is registered with the State Department of Assessments. If you're headquartered somewhere else, that would be an absolute minimum, but they may be limiting it to Maryland incorporated businesses. Again, we haven't seen the application form.
Okay, great, thank you.
Go ahead and apply as long as you're in good standing to do business in the state.
Okay. All right, so I'm so glad to see so many churches on. We're really glad to see you here. We also know that Senator Cardin was attentive to this issue at the federal level, and we're not quite sure what the outcome will be in that final bill. So next we're gonna, I do see that there are a number of other questions in, so I'm gonna open those up, but Henry, if you can go ahead and talk a little bit about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act.
Okay. This is the bill you heard about 2 weeks ago, that passed the House 10 days ago. Then it passed the House a second time because problems the Senate wouldn't go along with were pointed out, so they revised it. So then it passed the House, passed the Senate, and it was signed last week into law. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This was actually the second major relief bill that passed. There was one about a week or 10 days before this that was primarily some financial aid, including an emergency SBA loan program. Sick and family leave is a benefit for employees and federal compensation, a federally mandated benefit for employees and federal compensation to the employers who have to pay these benefits. So this slide primarily talks about what those benefits are. 2 weeks of paid sick time on at the employee's regular rate of pay. Whenever you see regular rate of pay in any language about this bill, remember there are caps. So if your regular rate of pay is higher than $511 per day, you're capped at $511. But it's 2 weeks, 10 working days of additional paid sick leave, 2 weeks of paid sick time at 2/3 of your regular rate of pay, capped at $200 per day. As you can see there, $10,000 per quarter. It's basically 10 weeks. While caring for an individual subject to quarantine or self-quarantine, family member or other individual caring for a child whose school or child care provider is closed or unavailable. There's an additional 10 weeks of paid family leave to care for a child. Child care is unavailable, schools closed. That has the same cap. One question that's come up about this, and I've seen guidance on, is the 2 weeks of paid sick time, if you take that to stay at home with a child, they say that if your only reason you're taking that time is for that purpose, and then you take the additional 10 weeks of family leave, the max you're going to be able to receive is the total $10,000. You won't be able, you won't, the paid sick time, you won't get the benefit of the $500 a day for the first 2 weeks if it's not for your own sickness or quarantine. I've actually gone online to DOL to try to get clarification on that. Another thing that's important to know is this is in addition, according to guidance they've put out, to other paid sick leave that the employee has as an employee benefit. The federal benefit is supposed to be on top of that. Again, we're hoping they'll clarify that as far as, for example, the state required paid sick leave. But the best reading now is, guidance I would have is, this is on top of that and beyond that. There's much more detail on the web here. We have a web link on our website right now to pretty thorough summaries of this act, explaining who's covered, who's not. This applies to all employers under 500. However, if you're less than 50 employees, you can apply for an exemption from the Federal Department of Labor. They're in the process of publishing. They have not yet published all the guidance that's they're going to require to get that exemption. The exemption would be if that would make it or endanger the viability of your business to be subject to this. Healthcare workers. There's detail online about who that covers, but healthcare operations are not covered by this. This is not paid sick time for health workers. Excuse me.
Okay, so a lot of people are asking about the grant fund. Am I eligible if this, what about that? Are churches eligible? Do I have to have shown already loss of revenue? Other kinds of questions like that. Our advice is it first come, first serve. Our advice would be just apply, because we tried to get a contact person to answer our questions at Department of Commerce, and they let us know as of Monday they already had 8,000 questions that they had received. We hope that they'll come out with an FAQ, but we don't know a lot of the ins and outs of how they're going to make the decisions on that fund. And so we would just recommend, if your organization has been affected by COVID-19, go to that website and see if you can put the materials together and put in your application. Okay. Anything else, Henry? Yeah. Oh, and there was other question was, what constitutes self-quarantine? So that is if you believe that you have been in contact with someone with COVID-19 and you are determining yourself that you're going to stay out of contact with other individuals for, I believe, 14 days.
All right.
Okay.
I don't think we have a slide on the credits, tax credits. Do we there?
No.
Let me say a word about the tax credits. We have information on the tax credits. There is that's the disaster assistance loans.
Okay, yeah.
Let me stick with the paid family leave for just a minute. From the beginning, it's been promised those caps are there. They cap how much the employee is entitled to, and that's the max that the federal government will compensate you for as the employer. But you will receive 100% compensation for the benefits you pay under this act. How is that going to happen? Until yesterday, the latest thing we had seen and what we thought was in the legislation actually was that you will be able to take your cost as a credit against the employer's share of FICA, which in most cases is something you file and pay quarterly. The purpose here was to get money out quickly. We knew that the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin had said, we're going to find ways to get the money out faster, and they did. Guidance was published over the weekend, actually late Friday night, I think, We have that available online that says you can, instead of paying anything in terms of payroll taxes to the federal government, you can offset or retain the amount you're entitled to, what you're paying out in this benefit. You can retain that out of your employee tax withholding, your employee share of FICA, your employer share of FICA, etc. And if what you can retain out of those payments is not enough, and you can retain that from all your tax liability for all your employees, not just the employees on leave. If you can't retain enough out of that amount, you will file and they will refund the balance of the credit that you're due. Your credit is for 100% of what you're going to pay out, and they're finding every way they can for you to have that money as fast as possible. So that guidance is up in pretty good detail. It was issued by the Department of Labor, Department of Treasury, and the IRS in one document. So, okay, if we could go to SBA now.
Okay.
This loan program came into existence in that first Relief Act I mentioned. SBA has always made disaster assistance loans available. They're available for economic loss, up to $2 million in assistance to small businesses to help overcome temporary loss of revenue. There's that 1 to 149 employees. That means full and part-time employees. There's more detail in some regulations that I think we have a web link to up on the website. Again, this is to pay debts, to meet payroll, accounts payable, any other operating costs that you're having problem paying because of the disaster's impact. There's the interest rate here for for-profit businesses, I think, is 3.5%. The interest rate for nonprofits is 2.75%. The payment terms, length of payment, term of the loans is flexible up to a maximum of 30 years. They say that based on the case-by-case basis on your ability to repay. There's a link to the site that gives you more detail on the kind of purposes of the money. It has a link to the application. This is an online application. You should be prepared with financial information, financial documents you may need to refer to or attach. And if you want to make sure you file a complete application, we've been on webinars with SBA about this. Have everything together when you start or as you're proceeding with the application. If you file an incomplete application, you're going to go to the back of the queue. So this is a very high volume application. Are public nonprofits able to apply for SBA loans? Most SBA programs do not cover nonprofits. This program specifically includes nonprofit organizations. So yes, nonprofits can apply for this. One word here. Here is where churches, we understand, have a problem. This was discussed on the SBA webinar last week with Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen. SBA disaster assistance for reconstruction, building repair in a flood, hurricane is available to churches. Economic recovery, economic operating cost or assistance is not at this point. That was something they've said they would try to continue to work on or look at, but as far as we understand it, churches are not eligible for business recovery financial assistance under this program.
Okay.
Now, let me continue. There is a huge SBA $350 billion package in the Senate bill. Those will be disaster assistance loans. We understand it, will be forgivable as you go along as long as you have not laid off staff, or to the extent you have not laid off staff. That's a very basic statement about them. We haven't seen the final language. Frankly, I don't know if anyone has in Congress at this point in time other than the negotiators. We do not know, and we're asking this question now. I've got our Senate offices over there trying to get the answer, if they can find it. we don't know how these loans that are on this slide are going to relate to that $350 million pot of money or those terms. So best advice we can give is apply. If it turns out that you need to drop that application in order to use the other program, we'll find that out hopefully in the next 3 days. But these are also first come, first serve, and you want to get this money quickly to sustain operations. You may be able to apply a second time for the other program. They may apply those terms to these loans. We just don't know the answer to that question yet. And we know the questions there, and I've posed it to the Senate offices, and I've posed it to our SBA contact in SBA Advocacy. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's a question about private nonprofits versus public nonprofits, and would this apply to public nonprofits?
I'll be honest, I don't know what the difference is. And I mean, we've had this conversation with our national council. They've tried to get some clarifying language, just say all 501c3 organizations or 501 exempt organizations. We don't know how that's going to come out in the final language. I have no idea what they were thinking of with that, frankly.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked, can you apply for both the state loan and the state relief fund and the SBA loan? And yes, as a matter of fact, the state relief fund actually anticipates that you are going to be applying for federal assistance. Okay. Okay. So there are some really detailed questions about the SBA loans. I think at this point, we're gonna move on. We have put in a lot of questions to the SBA about these, and I think that this may be overtaken by events when the new federal stimulus passes. There's going to be a new set of procedures and qualifications that will probably be coming out with a new webinar next week. So thank you very much, Henry, for that. And I think now we're going to move on to Carmen Marshall, who is our Director of Consulting. And Carmen, you're on mute. Let's see if we can unmute you. Carmen has been attending to the diversity, equity, inclusion issues related to COVID-19. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to be able to speak with you this afternoon. For those of you who may have, that I may have had the pleasure of working with you around diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know that I like to keep things very simple. And so today, I will endeavor to do the same thing. I'll speak as plainly and as simply as possible, understanding that nothing that I say is meant to offend any one no organization or individual. I just think it's important to keep the terminology as simple as possible. I always encourage those in my sessions to speak simply without worrying about being politically correct with me. And so,
thank you.
So, how is COVID-19 an equity issue, and what is our appropriate response? One of the ways that I believe COVID is an equity issue is that racism and xenophobia, for example, two things that we're pointing out today, are a fact of American life and American culture. This is the case when there is no global crisis. This is the case when there is no pandemic, no global health crisis or pandemic situation. Under ordinary circumstances, we see how people groups, various groups are treated. We see food insecurity in certain places, limited to no access of basic human needs being met, housing, evictions, etc. And even if you're in business, if you fall within a certain group, you may struggle to get access to capital. You may struggle to get credit. So in a crisis, these things are even worse. So I'm hoping today just to point out a few things that we might do to be mindful of how we operate, that we take responsibility for our own education, but to point out some things that we might notice and be tempted really to ignore simply because of the high stress level. One of the things that is also a part of American culture is white advantage or white privilege. And so these things show up under normal circumstances, but particularly in these times, in a crisis. And so how does it show up? One way it shows up is unequal distribution of resources, access to information, especially good information and timely information. And so in communication, it shows up in the planning and participation. It shows up in advocacy or the lack thereof when it comes to particular people groups. And so as you look at your own situations within your own organizations, one of the things you want to consider is when you consider how you will operate if you have to lay people off, if you have to furlough people or what have you. Make sure that there's someone, at a minimum, someone or a task force asking the question that challenges us to make sure, how are we treating people across the board? Are we giving advantage to one group over another? Because what we're really talking about are oppressive systems. And that's what racism is, an oppressive system. And so the way systems of oppression work, it lifts one up and puts another down. It includes one at the exclusion of another. And that's how those systems work. So we want to make sure that we are particularly focused in how we are treating people of color, since those systems don't naturally include people of color, don't naturally include immigrants, for example. We want to make sure that how we are talking about our plans, how we're communicating, that we're sensitive in our language. I believe words matter. We want to watch how we communicate things like go home or stay at home or use your savings. We don't want to make assumptions. And it doesn't mean that if you're African American or if you're an immigrant, for example, that you need special help. It's just that when you look at those situations, you want to make sure that you're being very sensitive to those in your employ and those in your community. There was racism beforehand, xenophobia beforehand, and so there certainly is now. When we offer help, we want to make sure that as we're offering assistance, that we're not doing more harm as we offer assistance. And one of the things that we might consider is how we offer that help. We don't want to make assumptions. We don't want to put people down. And we also want to be focused on our policies, compensation, extension of time off. We don't want to do anything that further stigmatizes people, naming things after, like blaming a group for a particular disease. When we consider our folks internally, we want to make sure that we use people first language, meaning that if we refer to someone who may be managing a disability, we don't want to say that blind guy or that crippled person, but rather the man who is managing whatever the disability may be, or may be visually impaired, but it's putting that person first. We also want to be mindful of intersectionality, that we may have someone in our organization or people that we serve even who may be a Latina mom or parent, and also taking care of a child with a disability. We want to make sure that we're sensitive in how we speak to speak to our people? And are we considering them as we make our plans? Who's speaking up for them in the organization? Is anyone concerned about those who live in a particular area? And so language is very important. Relationship building is very important. I believe nonprofits in particular have a special work to do in the community, have a particular role to play, keeping communities free of hatred and violence. And we ourselves, even at Maryland Nonprofits, we're on the journey with you. And so I don't sit here like the expert and the know-it-all, but one who is on the journey with you. And I believe that we can learn lessons from Hurricane Katrina. We don't have to commit environmental racism. We can be mindful of social justice concerns as we go through this together. And I believe that's the important word for the day, is together. We're all in it together. And so as practitioners and neighbors and colleagues and friends, just know we'll come through the other side of this, but we're going to do it together. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Carmen. And Portia Everett says in the chat, those impacted by homelessness as well. The hospital is not testing them and sending them back to shelters with little or no information. Residential programs are not getting the support and the PPEs and services. So this is a big issue.
Yeah, that's right. And so communication of good information, giving people a place to go, speaking up on behalf. Eviction is another thing. So while eviction may be put on hold, some folks may not know it, may not have access to the internet. And as Portia mentioned, may not have access to testing. That's exactly right. So we may have to speak up on behalf of those.
That's right. Okay. Thank you very much. All righty. In the chat, we keep getting questions. Am I eligible of this? Is that going to be various different aspects that are specific to your organization and whether you're eligible for the Maryland Relief Fund? Our recommendation is just apply. So we're not totally sure how those decisions are going to be made and all the fine points of the criteria. And maybe the state hasn't thought of all of those things yet either. And probably time is of the essence in applying for those. So we're going to move next to Patty Morton, our general counsel, who is going to talk about decision making in the times of COVID-19 around boards and human resources. Patty?
Thanks, Heather, and hello to everyone on the line. Really happy to be here today speaking with you about boards and human resources, just briefly. I know that at least for me and everyone I'm speaking with, it sort of feels like we're all upside down and having a hard time figuring out how to just walk forward, but that's what our boards really have to be doing right now. Using mission as our North Star, we're looking to our boards for leadership in these organizations that are providing such essential services to the citizens of Maryland. So one of the ways that we talk about how the boards can continue to function is by talking about how they meet when we're supposed to be maintaining social distancing. So Heather, if you don't mind switching to the next slide. Boards absolutely can continue to meet. This feels like a little nitty-gritty, but it's important for folks to understand. In order to meet their fiduciary obligations, boards continue to discuss what's important for the organizations that they are governing. There are two specific ways that Maryland law addresses how boards can continue to conduct business even if they can't get together in person. And you'll see on your screen that they are generally by having meetings using telephone and electronic devices, either Skype or Zoom as we are today, or even FaceTime. And that's really considered being present in person for a board meeting. So if you can get a quorum of your board members together on a joint call or video chat, that's a board meeting and you can conduct regular business that way. If there is no possibility of gathering your board members in that personal way over electronic participation, you can still have votes. It's called action without meeting because you're not getting your board members together for a meeting. If you are trying to conduct business without a meeting, the vote that you take has to be unanimous in favor of the action, and it has to be recorded in writing after the fact. So practically speaking, a board chair would send out a question for a vote. Assuming all board members agreed to the action carrying, they would indicate so by reply email or other written method, and those written votes would be maintained with the minutes of that meeting, that action that's taking place without meeting. So our model bylaws are available on our website, and you can find this language in them. I encourage you to do that.
Thank you, Patty.
Any questions about boards meeting remotely or acting without meeting?
So I'm not seeing questions in the chat on that. There was a question related to Carmen's presentation. So our programs are moving online, and there's no way we can safely provide our classes to groups in person. So that means that someone needs the internet and a computer to participate. How do we be more equitable in our new reality? So I do know of at least one of our members reached out to us because they're actually providing laptops to children in Baltimore City, and I think some other nonprofits are doing those kinds of things. And Comcast has a free internet program going on right now related to COVID-19, so you may want to direct people to that. And I also know that some nonprofits are just using phone, which most people still have a phone, to reach people they're serving. And Carmen, would you like to add anything more about that?
Those were the examples I was going to give as well, Heather, and using conference call. That's right.
And conference calls.
Free conference calls, yeah.
Okay. So Patty, if our bylaws don't already have this wording, what do we do?
I mute myself.
We can hear you.
Great, thanks. So a couple things. Under pre-COVID-19 circumstances, I would say put something on the agenda to discuss an amendment to your bylaws, and then follow the provisions of your bylaws to pass that amendment by the board. These days, I would say there's a little latitude, and you could simply undertake telephone meeting or action without meeting, even if it's not in your bylaws, because the law provides for it. And then at your earliest convenience, do your best to amend the bylaws.
Okay, so is action without a meeting subject to a quorum rules?
So if your board wishes to take action without meeting, that means including without having a telephone or Zoom call, the vote must be unanimous. So, so not just quorum, but a unanimous vote from your entire board.
Okay, so if you're voting by email, you have to have, and you have 10 board members, you have to have 10 board members that say, that
yes,
email a yes vote to you, and you
yes,
have that in your record.
Yep, and then you would collect all of the printed messages saying yes, and you would maintain that written record with your minutes.
Okay, so this is from Maureen Becker. Can an ongoing discussion like on Basecamp be considered a meeting, or does it require that all members be present simultaneously?
So in order for it to be considered a meeting, all of the participants have to be able to speak and be heard simultaneously. So an email string doesn't count. A telephone or Zoom or Skype or FaceTime call does count.
Okay. And David Heiser writes, there's a huge difference between board assembled versus unanimous consent by all directors entitled to vote. Why the huge difference?
Right. So action without meeting is really not a preferred way for boards to make decisions. Ideally, we have our governing bodies collecting either in person if they're able, or by electronic participation, to hash out their collective thoughts on something. So ideally we have conversation and debate and discourse, and people are able to add their thoughts and really grind it out together. If that's not possible, then we need to know that really the entire governing body was satisfied with the proposal in order to pass it.
Okay, thank you. And for speak and hard of hearing or deaf people, I assume visual communication would be included, says Amy Greenfelder.
Thank you, Amy. Yes.
And sorry, there was another question here. Please remember, so Lynn Davis says, please remember that even telephone conferencing may exclude people because they may not have minutes, I think she means, or other board materials in front of them. We will provide a minute card for those who need them. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of going back to the old days when, you know, you used to mail out a physical board packet to people. And if that's the case for some of your board members, we may need to be using some old school methods, which would be difficult if you can't go into the office and make photocopies. But as Henry covered earlier, you are allowed under the current executive orders from the governor to go into your office. It's just that your office cannot be open to the public. Okay. So it said that emails do not count. What if board members' communication is documented related to the meeting? If you can just clarify that one more time, Patty. I think it's a similar question, but just to the difference between the two.
Could you repeat it, Heather? I didn't hear you.
So Cheryl Maxwell said, it was said that emails do not count. What if all board members' communication is documented related to the meeting?
Technically, under the law, an email back and forth does not count either as electronic participation. So you could have an email conversation among the board members, and then if you then wanted to take a vote on what was discussed, then you would have to follow the action without meeting requirements. In other words, a question would go out, a unanimous vote would have to be had, and then those yes votes would all be recorded with your minutes. So that's how you can have an email conversation and have a vote, but it would have to be unanimous and recorded in writing.
Okay, so if one person votes no, or someone abstains, or someone doesn't get back to you, then it's not an action without a meeting.
Correct.
Okay, so Lynn Davis was clarifying. She was talking about the equity issues. Thank you, Lynn. Sorry, we're mixing things up here. And yes, we are going to be emailing out the presentation. There was another question unrelated to what we were talking about. Oh gosh, it's almost 3 o'clock. So I'm going to save that question for later and see if you want to just mention about unemployment briefly, and note that we are going to be having a webinar that's free to the public tomorrow at 3 p.m. that's going to go in more detail on this.
Thanks, Heather. That's right. So tomorrow at 3, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive, but let me just quickly, in the minute that we have left, talk briefly about some of the actions that employers are being forced to address right now. And that's layoffs, furlough, possibly reduction in force, or something that I've learned a little bit more about this week, work sharing programs. So under the current operations, benefits can continue for employees who are laid off, furloughed. So that's great news for employees. And employees can apply for unemployment benefits if they are laid off, furloughed, or if there's an actual reduction in force. So I'm sensitive to the time, Heather, and I'm not sure if you want me to keep talking or stop talking because it's 3.
Okay, so I think it's just a reinforcing that we will be going for a full hour on these issues tomorrow on our webinar at 3 p.m. And if you want that information but are not physically going to be able to be present at 3 p.m., please just sign up for it, because that'll get you on the list to receive the slides and the recording for tomorrow's webinar as well, so we can make all that information available to everyone. And I think related to the FAQs on unemployment, it's similar to the answer to the SBA loans, is you know, am I eligible if I'm part-time, or am I eligible if my hours were 40 hours and now they've been reduced to 20, and other kinds of questions like that. And the advice is just apply. So the unemployment programs are going to be loosened up quite considerably in the COVID-19 environment. So someone's saying, how do we get the Zoom information for the call tomorrow? So you need to register for that webinar on our website at marylandnonprofits.org. Click on events and then calendar, and you can see that issue here. I'll put up the slide about that event, and go ahead, Henry.
Yes, thank you. There is a very good FAQ. Everyone on the call should look at the website Maryland Business Express. Just put that into Google. When you go to that page, in the upper left side, there is a box for business information related to coronavirus. That'll take you to a page that has a complete compendium of information compiled by the State Department of Commerce. There is a Maryland Department of Labor FAQ there on coronavirus and unemployment insurance, and it will tell you what the governor's executive orders have provided. For example, your employees could now receive unemployment insurance coverage if their hours are reduced because of issues caused by the coronavirus. They can receive partial unemployment benefits while they're still working part-time. So, I mean, there's just a lot of information out there. We can't possibly answer every question, but I mean, we can tell you where the answers are in many cases. Other cases, and I've seen some in the chat and some on the Q&A, we will try to look up answers to some of those questions, for example. But a lot of this information is there if you know where the resources are. And there you are. You go into that pink box and hit the one link in there, you'll get the site I'm talking to. It also has a list of all the state programs, everything else.
Okay, great. Thank you, Henry. And we also have a COVID-19 page at marylandnonprofits.org. And this COVID, what nonprofits need to know, you can click on this. Oops. And then we have lots of other things here. Sorry. Here we go. COVID-19, what nonprofits need to know. Oh, I clicked on salary survey. All right, so marylandnonprofits.org is a resource for you there of all of the COVID-19 information. We want to thank everyone for joining us today on the COVID-19, what nonprofits need to know. Here's that website I was trying to get to. And we have resources from the health department, resources on business continuity, financial grants that you can get, all kinds of information, and is updated almost daily, even hourly, on information for the nonprofit community. So thank you again, Patty, Carmen, and Henry, and thank you all members of the nonprofit community for participating. This has been Maryland Nonprofits COVID-19, what nonprofits need to know. Stay tuned for more information in the future, and we will be making the slides and the recording of this available to those who registered. Thank you.